The story begins high in the Andes, where the air itself seems to shimmer with both holiness and menace. The Inca Empire, vast and disciplined, rose from stone and sun, worshipping precision and perfection as though they were the breath of the gods. To outsiders, their world appeared radiant, golden temples gleaming at sunrise, virginal priestesses carrying offerings of maize and coca leaves, and an emperor believed to be the living son of the sun itself. It was a civilization of light, order, and divine geometry. But every light casts a shadow, and the Inca knew this better than most. Beneath the sanctity of daylight, another world existed, one of blood, secrecy, and trembling faith that could only awaken when the sun fell behind the mountains. Even in their own chronicles, written under Spanish conquest, the whispers are there, brief mentions of ceremonies no scribe dared fully describe, of nights when the laws of the empire seemed to melt away. They called these the nights of the hidden fire. To speak of them was dangerous, to witness them was divine, and to remember them was a curse. No chronicler wrote their details, no missionary dared record their songs, and yet the faint traces survive, scattered in myths, oral memories, and the dark corners of archaeological discovery. What could drive such a disciplined, solar-obsessed people to perform their most sacred acts in total darkness? The answer lies in the Inca soul, a mind bound to balance, to the idea that every force of light required its opposite to exist. Their world was built upon duality, male and female, sun and moon, life and death, order and chaos. But duality is not equality. The empire presented its radiant face to the world, a face of gold and harmony, while its reflection lived underground, in rituals meant to feed the gods that the sun refused to illuminate. These were not acts of evil to the Inca, they were acts of necessity. To deny the night was to unbalance the cosmos. To feed only the sun was to starve the universe. And so, deep within their temples and beneath their festivals, the Inca embraced a forbidden worship that only the moon could witness. Imagine the city of Cusco by day, the rhythm of drums echoing across the stone plazas, priests chanting praises to Inti, women weaving sacred textiles dyed with cochineal reds. Every act is ordered, precise, public. But as dusk falls, the air thickens. The people retreat to their homes, and silence descends upon the sacred capital. Only certain chosen ones remain, priests wrapped in blackened alpaca cloaks, their faces painted with ash. Torches flicker against temple walls, and the smell of burnt maize and animal fat fills the corridors. In the darkness of the Coricancha, the great temple of the sun, secret doors open to passages few ever saw. There, in chambers lit only by flickering firelight, the empire performs what no foreigner was ever meant to know. It is said that on certain nights, when the moon was full and blood-red, the high priests gathered in caves outside Cusco to conduct the ceremonies of balance. The Inca emperor himself would not attend, for these rites were older than his bloodline, remnants of a faith that predated the empire, inherited from forgotten Andean tribes that spoke of gods who thrived in shadow. The priests believed that while Inti ruled the day, other forces watched at night, demanding recognition through offerings of fear, pain, and pleasure. The night became a living being, unpredictable, seductive, and cruel. To deny it was to invite disaster. The chroniclers of the conquest, such as Cristobal de Molina and José de Acosta, recorded fragments of what they could understand, and then turned away in revulsion. One wrote that the Inca performed rites under the moon that they refused to explain, saying only that the sun demanded his counterpart. Another spoke of women made divine by night and destroyed by dawn. And then silence. Pages torn, lines redacted, testimonies lost. It was as if history itself flinched from remembering. To enter this story is to step beyond the golden facade of the Inca world, beyond the terraces and temples that tourists admire, and into the breathless spaces where faith and fear became one. These ceremonies were not spectacles of madness. They were intricate, deliberate acts rooted in cosmic philosophy. The Inca believed that creation itself was born from darkness, that the first dawn rose only after sacrifice. Night was not the absence of the divine, but its womb. Every ritual, no matter how depraved it may seem to modern eyes, was a reenactment of the universe's birth, chaos surrendering to order, flesh dissolving into spirit, and death feeding the light. So, when we speak of the most depraved night ceremonies, we are not merely speaking of cruelty or lust. We are speaking of a sacred language written in fear, of a people who believed that only by touching the abyss could they keep the sun alive. Their empire was built not only on stone and discipline but on secrets, secrets buried beneath gold, beneath silence, beneath the very earth itself. And tonight, we will follow those whispers into the darkness the Inca tried to hide from the world. When the Inca looked up at the sky, they did not see stars, they saw souls, ancestors, and warning signs written in the heavens. To them, every force in nature was alive, bound in a delicate relationship of balance. The universe was not divided into good and evil, but into light and shadow, two halves of the same cosmic body. The sun, Inti, was the heart of their empire, but the Inca understood that even the heart could not beat without its shadow. This belief was the foundation of their hidden rituals. It is why darkness, far from being feared, was treated as a sacred presence. The night was not an enemy to be conquered. It was a teacher, a mirror that reflected what daylight refused to show. The empire itself was built upon this philosophy of duality, yin and yang, the eternal pairing of opposites. Every valley had its mountain, every ruler his queen, every act of creation its act of destruction. The Inca capital of Cusco was designed in this same image, two halves, Hanan Cusco and Huron Cusco, the upper and lower worlds. By day, the priests of Hanan worshipped Inti, pouring golden chicha and singing hymns of order and obedience. But by night, it was the turn of Huron, the priests of the hidden world, to commune with what they called Ukupasha, the dark womb beneath existence. There, the lines between life and death, dream and waking, body and spirit, began to blur. To the Inca mind, the sun was powerful but incomplete. He could bring life, but he could not heal the wounds of the soul. The night was the realm of ancestors, of dreams, of secrets whispered by mountains and rivers. When an Inca slept, their spirit traveled through Ukupasha, meeting the dead, receiving visions, and sometimes never returning. The priests who served this realm were not ordinary men. They were chosen from childhood, often after strange omens, like being born under an eclipse or surviving a lightning strike. These priests were said to speak with shadows. In public, they performed acts of purification and prophecy. In secret, they prepared for the ceremonies that took place under the moon. The night itself became a sacred instrument. It concealed what could not be shown and revealed what could not be spoken. Under the stars, the priests performed symbolic inversions of the day's rituals, chants sung backward, sacred patterns drawn in ash instead of gold, offerings made to the unseen rather than the radiant. While the sun priests raised their hands to the sky, the night priests pressed theirs to the soil, whispering prayers into the earth's veins. It was believed that in doing so, they nourished the shadow of Inti, the hidden half of the god that sustained the balance of all creation. Without these rituals, the world would tilt toward chaos. Ordinary citizens rarely witnessed these ceremonies, but they sensed their presence. They heard the low hum of drums echoing through the valleys, saw the flickering of distant fires on the mountains, smelled the strange incense made from charred maize and llama fat. Parents warned their children not to wander after sunset, for the spirits walked among men. And yet, there was reverence in the fear. Every Inca knew that while the sun fed the crops, the night fed the soul. To insult the dark was to offend the ancestors who lived within it. Archaeological discoveries in the high Andes still bear the traces of these hidden beliefs. In certain temples, murals depict twin deities, one bathed in gold, the other in obsidian. In burial chambers, archaeologists have found offerings meant not for Inti, but for the moon, the serpents, and the beings of the underworld. Some caves contain ritual vessels shaped like open mouths, as if meant to speak or consume in darkness. Scholars now believe these sites were connected to the night ceremonies, places where the veil between worlds was deliberately thinned. The Spanish chroniclers who later tried to erase Inca religion could not destroy what they did not understand. The priests who led these ceremonies belonged to secret brotherhoods, each bound by silence. The Wilca Umo, the high priest of the sun, might oversee the empire's rituals by day, but by night, His subordinates met in shadow to conduct rites he never mentioned. They believed that darkness was a living entity, not a symbol, but a force that listened, remembered, and demanded respect. One chant recorded in fragmented Quechua by missionaries translates roughly as, "The sun sleeps, and his heart beats in the ground. Feed it or it will stop." Those words, simple yet terrifying, reveal the essence of Inca spirituality, the fear that if the dark was neglected, the light itself would die. At these night gatherings, the boundary between priest and spirit dissolved. Participants inhaled smoke made from sacred herbs, drank aca mixed with hallucinogenic seeds, and entered trance states meant to guide them into uku pasha. There, they claimed to speak with ancestors and elemental forces, beings not of flesh but of echo and memory. Some said that they saw the world turn inside out, that mountains breathed, rivers bled, and the sun itself appeared as a black mirror. When they returned at dawn, they were pale, trembling, and silent. They had crossed into what they called the second sight, and they brought back messages that shaped imperial decisions. Entire wars, marriages, and sacrifices were said to have been ordained by visions from the night. Yet, for all its sacred importance, the darkness remained forbidden to most. Even nobles feared to speak of it openly. The Inca Empire maintained strict control over who could access such knowledge, for it was believed that a person unprepared to face the night's truth could lose their sanity, or worse, invite curses upon their lineage. This secrecy ensured that when the Spanish arrived, the most powerful aspects of Inca religion vanished into silence. Chroniclers like Bernabe Cobo hinted that certain rites were practiced in the hours when the sun hides his face, but left no detail. Their omission was not out of respect, it was fear. To modern eyes, it is easy to see these beliefs as superstition, but to the Inca, it was science, the metaphysics of survival. The night was not chaos, it was equilibrium. Without it, crops failed, rain ceased, illness spread. To heal, one had to pass through darkness. To renew, one had to destroy. These ceremonies, shrouded in secrecy, were not mere acts of barbarism but expressions of a truth older than the empire itself, that all creation must contain its opposite. And so, the Inca continued to worship both the sun and its shadow, knowing that neither could exist alone. When the last rays of daylight slipped behind the mountains, they did not fear the coming dark. They opened their arms to it, whispering prayers to the unseen gods that ruled the hours no one else dared to name. For them, the night was not the absence of faith. It was faith itself, raw, trembling, and eternal. They were called the Aklakuna, the chosen women. To the outside world, they were the most sacred and revered of all the Inca's servants, pure maidens selected by the priests of Inti, raised in cloistered temples, and dedicated entirely to the gods. Chroniclers describe them as the virgins of the sun, comparing them to nuns of Christian faith, yet their true existence was far more complex and far more disturbing. Behind the polished perfection of their lives, hidden from the gaze of commoners and conquerors alike, lay a secret purpose that tied them to the empire's most forbidden rites. These women were not simply chosen, they were claimed. Their purity was not freedom but preparation. By day, they wove the finest textiles and brewed sacred chicha for offerings. By night, some were led into ceremonies that no record was ever meant to preserve. The selection of an akla was both an honor and a death sentence of sorts. Each year, imperial inspectors traveled through the provinces, searching for girls between 8 and 10 who showed signs of physical beauty, intelligence, and obedience. When they were found, their families celebrated and wept in the same breath. To be taken to the Temple of the Sun was to gain divine favor for one's lineage, but it also meant the child would never return. The girls were escorted to Cusco or to one of the provincial aklawasi, houses of the chosen, where they were trained in ritual purity. They learned to spin, to cook, to sing the hymns of the gods, and to obey in silence. They were told that their bodies belonged to Inti, their voices to the priests, their dreams to the empire. By day, the life of the Aklakuna was serene, almost monastic. The courtyards of their temples were bright with sunlight, the air filled with the fragrance of coca leaves and burning incense. They wore white robes of vicuña wool and golden jewelry that reflected the glory of the sun god. But as dusk fell, the tone changed. The gates were closed. The laughter ceased. The senior priestesses, often women who had served for decades, would appear in dark cloaks, their faces marked with ash and soot. The younger girls would be led to chambers lit by oil lamps, where the lessons of the night began. These were not the hymns of Inti, these were invocations of the moon, of Mama Quilla, the goddess of feminine power and shadow. The Inca viewed the moon as the sun's counterpart, his wife, his reflection, and at times, his rival. While the sun ruled the empire's masculine order, the moon governed fertility, emotion, and mystery. The Aklakuna were taught that to serve the sun, one must also understand the moon's hunger. Thus began the ceremonies of lunar devotion, rituals performed in secrecy and silence. The girls were given hallucinogenic drinks brewed from the San Pedro cactus or ayahuasca, mixtures that blurred the boundary between dream and waking. Under the shimmering light of the full moon, they danced slowly, their movements representing the cycles of creation and destruction. The priests watched from behind carved stone screens, chanting to summon the spirits of fertility. Some of these ceremonies were said to culminate in what later Spanish friars described with disgust as the union of gods and flesh. The Inca did not see it as defilement. To them, it was divine embodiment, the merging of human vessels with celestial forces. The chosen women were seen as bridges, carrying the energy of the gods into the physical world. What outsiders interpreted as exploitation, the Inca regarded as sacred necessity. The line between holiness and horror dissolved in the flicker of torchlight. Some Aklakuna emerged from these nights claiming to have seen the sun himself descend as a column of fire, others to have been consumed by the moon's shadow. Many did not speak at all afterward. It is here, in these nocturnal rites, that the contradiction of Inca spirituality reveals itself most vividly, the coexistence of divine purity and unspeakable darkness. The Aklakuna were symbols of untouched perfection, yet they were also instruments of rituals that tested the limits of human endurance. They were kept untouched by mortal men, yet given to gods whose demands knew no mercy. The psychological tension within them must have been unbearable. Every moment of tenderness, a touch, a smile, a memory of family, was forbidden. Every emotion had to be transformed into devotion. To feel love for another human was sin. To surrender oneself completely to the gods, even in pain or humiliation, was salvation. Some accounts suggest that certain Akla were chosen not for marriage to noblemen or priests, but for sacrifice. They were prepared with care, their skin anointed with oils, their bodies purified through fasting and prayer. In these cases, the night ceremonies became a kind of farewell to the world. The chosen girl would be dressed in silver, symbol of the moon, and led into the mountains where, under the veil of darkness, she would enter a trance. The priests would chant softly, guiding her toward the state they called the sleep of the gods. Whether through intoxicants or ritual suffocation, she would pass peacefully, her death believed to ensure the fertility of the land and the balance of the cosmos. To the Inca, she was not dead but transformed, her spirit now a part of the eternal dialogue between the sun and the moon. Spanish chroniclers, forbidden by their own faith to write explicitly about these rites, hinted at them only in whispers. One wrote that certain women of the sun were used in ways no Christian ear should hear. Another noted that some were not seen after the new moon, and none dared ask why. Yet archaeological evidence supports the existence of such ceremonies. In Andean burial sites, bodies of young women have been found preserved by the cold, their faces serene, their garments immaculate. Chemical analysis revealed traces of hallucinogens and alcohol in their systems, substances used to induce calm and surrender. These were not scenes of violence but of ritual transcendence, conducted in solemn silence beneath the stars. To imagine the life of an Akla is to glimpse both the beauty and the cruelty of Inca faith. She was both cherished and imprisoned, sacred and expendable. Her every breath was part of a cosmic equation she could neither question nor escape. The empire saw her as a vessel of divine equilibrium, her innocence balancing the empire's hidden sins. Without her, the rituals of night could not proceed. Without her, the gods would turn away. The purity of her blood, her fear, and her submission were seen as nourishment for the divine order that kept the sun rising each day. In the stillness of those temples, under the cold silver gaze of the moon, these women lived and died as offerings, not to cruelty, but to balance. They believed, as their priests taught them, that pain was not punishment but transformation, that the surrender of the self was the highest form of devotion. And so, they endured. The world remembers them as virgins of the sun, but perhaps they were truly daughters of the moon, silent witnesses to the empire's most depraved and most divine mysteries. They called it the Feast of Shadows, a night without the sun, a festival that existed beside the grandeur of the Inti Raymi, yet was never named aloud. To the ordinary citizen of Cusco, Inti Raymi was the holiest celebration of the year, the triumph of light, the renewal of life, the promise of another cycle of fertility. But deep beneath the radiant pageantry, hidden in the sacred valleys and mountain caves, another ritual took place. It was said to occur on the same solstice, after the great fires of the day had burned low and the last chants of the sun priests faded into silence. When the empire slept, a different kind of devotion began, one that fed not the sun's brilliance, but its hunger. The Inca believed that the sun, though eternal, could die. Each solstice marked a cosmic moment when light itself grew weak, when darkness crept too close to the world. The priests claimed that to restore balance, the empire had to feed the sun through its shadow. That phrase appears in fragments of colonial documents, its meaning long debated. To the priests of Ukupasha, it meant that the sun's life could only continue if the dark half of the cosmos was appeased. Thus, while the day was filled with offerings of golden cups and songs of light, the night was consecrated to acts that inverted every rule of the empire. The Feast of Shadows was the world turned upside down, the sacred night when chaos became divine. The preparations began weeks before. Selected priests, dancers, and acolytes withdrew from society, fasting and purifying themselves with ritual smoke. At dusk on the solstice, they would gather in secret at mountain caves or near ancient lakes, places considered the mouths of the earth. There, the fire-bearers lit torches made from the bones of llamas and smeared with resin. The flames burned low and black, casting moving shadows on the cave walls. Each participant painted their face with soot or powdered obsidian, symbolizing the absorption of light into darkness. Their garments were turned inside out. Gold jewelry, the symbol of daylight, was forbidden. Instead, they wore silver, shells, and black feathers, offerings to the night. The air inside the caves grew thick with the scent of burning maize, animal fat, and a strange sweet aroma of hallucinogenic herbs. Drums began to beat, slow at first, like the echo of a distant heart. The rhythm built, and the chanting began, deep, guttural, pulsing with breath and fear. The Inca did not worship the night as a god but as a state of being, a passage. During the Feast of Shadows, participants sought to dissolve their individuality, to become one with the living darkness that connected all creation. This was not celebration, it was communion. The rituals were designed to unmake the boundaries that separated man from the divine, to bring forth visions that the light could never allow. Eyewitness accounts from early Spanish friars describe hints of what might have taken place. One, a terrified Jesuit, wrote that, in certain caves the natives gathered at the solstice, wearing masks of the moon and the serpent, dancing until they fell to the earth like those possessed. Another claimed that the blood of animals, and sometimes men, was poured into the cracks of the rock to awaken the mountain. Scholars believe these were distorted observations of the Feast of Shadows, glimpsed through the moral panic of European eyes. Yet even stripped of exaggeration, the rituals were undeniably intense. Blood offerings, sexual symbolism, and trance-inducing substances were all part of the process. The goal was transformation, to reach the threshold between human and divine, life and death. At the center of the ceremony stood a great stone idol, carved in the likeness of a jaguar, the Inca symbol of the underworld. Around it, dancers circled counterclockwise, reversing the motion of the sun across the sky. This inversion symbolized the temporary surrender of light to shadow, a necessary sacrifice for the rebirth of cosmic balance. Each movement was deliberate, the bending of knees, the raising of hands, the trembling of fingers covered in ash. The chants grew louder, more desperate. Drums merged with heartbeats. The air became electric with fear and ecstasy. Somewhere deep in the ceremony, the Aklakuna appeared, the chosen women who bridged the realms of day and night. Draped in silver robes, their faces serene, they carried bowls filled with fermented drink laced with sacred herbs. As they moved among the dancers, they whispered invocations of the moon. Their role was not passive. The Aklakuna embodied the lunar force that mirrored the sun's light. They represented both submission and power. When they entered the circle, the drumming stopped. One priest would raise his arms and chant a single phrase, "The sun must feed." The meaning of this statement remains debated, but many historians suspect that symbolic or physical offerings followed, blood drawn, sacrifices made, a ritual merging of human essence with divine hunger. To the Inca, this was not brutality but balance. Every drop of blood spilled in darkness ensured that the sun would rise again. Each act of surrender, each transgression of earthly boundaries, was a way of reminding the cosmos that life required death, order required chaos, and purity required its shadow. The participants entered trance states, claiming to see the world unfold as if through the eyes of gods, the mountains breathing, the rivers glowing with liquid fire, the stars pulsing like living hearts. When they emerged at dawn, covered in soot and sweat, they believed they had carried the empire safely through the death of light. The Feast of Shadows was never recorded officially, and the Inca themselves forbade its description. To speak of it openly was to weaken its power. But fragments survived, buried in myth and memory. Among modern Quechua communities, there are still faint echoes, midnight dances performed in silence, blackened offerings left at cave mouths, songs that speak of the sun's hunger and the bride of the shadow. These are not relics of fear but acts of remembrance, proof that the Inca understanding of balance still breathes beneath centuries of suppression. Spanish conquerors who later heard rumors of these solstice nights reacted with horror. They saw only blasphemy, orgies of blood and darkness, proof of devil worship. They burned caves, destroyed idols, and erased every mention of the ceremonies. But in their zeal, they misunderstood what they destroyed. The Feast of Shadows was not a rebellion against the sun, it was a sacrifice for him. It was the empire's secret act of faith, a night-long prayer that the dawn would come again. And when dawn finally did break over the Andes, the priests and dancers would kneel facing the horizon, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. The sun would rise blood-red through the mist, and the first rays would touch their faces like forgiveness. They would chant softly, "The sun lives," before retreating into silence. The world would return to order, the empire would resume its golden rituals, and no one would speak of what had happened in the night. For the Inca, faith was never whole without its shadow, and it was in that darkness that their gods were truly fed. They called it Capacocha, the sleep of the chosen. To the Inca, it was not a punishment, not an act of cruelty, but a gift, the highest honor a human could receive. The selected children were believed to be pure enough to touch the divine, their souls uncorrupted, their innocence capable of healing the balance between gods and men. Yet, behind this serene idea of sacrifice lay something deeper, something far more unsettling. It was not just about death. It was about transformation, the belief that only through voluntary surrender, through perfect fear and perfect faith, could the world remain whole. And though history remembers these rituals as solemn offerings performed on mountaintops, few speak of the nights that came before, the secret preparations, the forbidden rites that unfolded in the shadows before the final dawn. The children chosen for Capacocha came from across the empire. They were often the most beautiful or healthy from noble families, selected by the priests after omens or celestial signs. To be chosen was a moment of both pride and terror. Their parents wept as the imperial emissaries arrived, for they knew their child would never return. But to refuse was unthinkable. The sacrifice was believed to ensure prosperity for generations. The chosen child was no longer human in the eyes of the empire. They became living embodiments of divine will, walking prayers, who would one day join the gods in eternity. The preparation was long and meticulous. 4 months, the children lived within the sacred compounds of Cusco, isolated from the world. They were bathed daily, fed only the purest foods, maize, water, and llama milk, and taught the rituals of the sun and the moon. At night, priests whispered sacred songs into their ears while burning herbs that induced dreams. The children were told they were leaving this world not as victims but as messengers. They were not to fear the cold or the pain of the journey. They were told they would awaken in Inti's golden garden, where the mountains sing and the ancestors wait. But the true mystery lay in the final nights before the sacrifice, nights that Spanish chroniclers only hinted at, describing them as ceremonies so secret that none dared to write of them. These were the rites of the last shadow, conducted under the moon, away from the eyes of the empire. The priests led the children through tunnels or along narrow mountain paths to sanctuaries lit by faint torchlight. There, they were given a drink made from chicha mixed with coca and ayahuasca, substances that softened their senses and dissolved fear. The air was filled with low chanting, the rhythmic beating of drums, and the whisper of wind against stone. The children were not alone. The Akla Kuna, the virgins of the sun, often accompanied them, their presence symbolic, representing the unity of the empire's divine male and female energies. They bathed the children's hands and faces with cold water, combed their hair with golden pins, and placed silver ornaments upon their brows. To the priests, these acts were not gestures of tenderness but sacred preparation. The children's bodies were being purified, stripped of worldly touch, made ready to become offerings that could bridge life and eternity. And then came the trance, what the Inca called the sleep before the sun. The children were guided into a deep state of calm, brought on by song, smoke, and intoxicating brew. Their breathing slowed. Their eyes closed. They were told to dream of the gods, to see the mountains rising like pillars of light, to feel the warmth of Inti upon their skin. Some accounts claim that the priests spoke to them gently, promising that their families would see their faces in the stars. In that moment, death ceased to exist. There was only transition, from body to spirit, from fear to fulfillment. When dawn came, the procession began. Dressed in fine garments, the children were carried upon litters through villages and valleys. The people bowed as they passed, weeping and chanting prayers of gratitude. It was believed that the children's steps consecrated the earth. Every mountain, river, and sky along the way received their blessing. The higher they climbed, the thinner the air became, the colder the wind. Yet the children never cried. They had entered a state beyond pain. The priests described them as already half divine. At the chosen summit, often a snow-covered peak so high it seemed to touch the heavens, the ritual reached its end. There, the priests built small stone shrines called huacas, believed to be gates between the worlds. Offerings were placed inside, miniature figurines of gold and silver, fine textiles, and sometimes locks of the child's hair tied with red thread. The child would be seated in a fetal position, wrapped in ceremonial cloth, and surrounded by objects meant to accompany them to the afterlife. The air was thin, freezing, silent. One final chant filled the sky, a call to Inti to accept the gift, to restore harmony between light and shadow. Then came stillness. The priests departed, leaving the body untouched. For centuries, these rituals remained buried in myth, dismissed as legend, until the mountains began to give up their secrets. In the 20th century, archaeologists discovered frozen remains of Capacocha children, perfectly preserved in the ice. Their faces were peaceful as if asleep. Chemical analysis revealed traces of alcohol and coca, confirming the ancient accounts of sedation and trance. No signs of struggle. No wounds. Only serenity, frozen at the moment of surrender. The most famous of these discoveries, the Yayaka maiden, still rests in eternal slumber, her skin unbroken, her eyes closed, her expression almost divine. To modern eyes, it is a scene of tragedy, the loss of innocent life to superstition. But to the Inca, it was something far greater. Death, in their eyes, was not an end but a return. These children were not sacrificed to cruel gods, but offered to cosmic balance. Their purity ensured the stability of the empire, the fertility of the soil, the movement of the stars. Every heartbeat silenced upon those mountains was believed to echo through the heavens, calling forth the next sunrise. The empire survived through their silence. Yet, within this beauty lies undeniable horror, the quiet terror of faith pushed beyond mercy. To imagine the trembling of a child's hands, the cold against their skin, the final breath beneath a sky blazing with stars, it forces us to confront the thin line between devotion and destruction. The priests who led these rites believed themselves to be saviors, but what they truly preserved was the darkness within belief itself, the conviction that suffering could sanctify, that death could nourish life. And so, Capacocha remains one of history's most haunting contradictions, a ritual of peace born from violence, of innocence turned into cosmic currency. The Inca saw no evil in it, only order, beauty, and duty. They believed that without these offerings, the sun would falter, the crops would fail, the empire would crumble. The children became eternal, guardians of balance, frozen messengers between two worlds. When the night fell upon the Andes after each sacrifice, the priests would stand in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere among them, they believed, the souls of the children shone, tiny suns in the vast darkness, forever feeding the light they had died to preserve. They called it the night of rebirth. To outsiders, it was merely another act of sacrifice, another ritual performed under the watchful gaze of the moon. But for the Inca, it was something far more mysterious, an echo of cosmic creation itself. The ceremony took place on nights when the stars burned brightest, when the priests believed that the barrier between the living and the divine world thinned to a veil of light. It was during these nights that human life, fire, and the sacred elements of nature became one, consumed, reborn, and purified through forces no mortal could comprehend. Fire and ice were the twin faces of the gods. To the Inca, both were sacred, both capable of granting life or taking it away. Fire represented Inti, the sun, giver of warmth and growth, while ice belonged to the high mountains, the domain of Apu, the spirit of the peaks. Together, they embodied the eternal cycle of existence, creation through destruction, renewal through death. When the priests performed rituals of fire and ice, they were not simply invoking natural forces. They were reenacting the birth and death of the cosmos itself, reminding the people that even suffering could be a form of divine communication. These ceremonies were not for the faint of heart. They unfolded in silence and secrecy, often far from the temples of Cusco, deep within mountain sanctuaries or frozen plateaus where no human settlement dared remain. The fire rituals began with purification. The priests would fast for days, their bodies cleansed with cold river water, their minds sharpened by coca leaves and prayer. Then, at dusk, they gathered in circles around great stone altars. Flames rose from bowls of burning resin, casting trembling light upon their painted faces. The priests chanted in the ancient tongue of their ancestors, their voices blending with the whisper of wind and the crackle of fire. Into the flames they cast offerings, golden llamas, corn, coca leaves, feathers dyed in sacred colors. The fire devoured them greedily, transforming matter into smoke, smoke into spirit. It was believed that the gods fed not on the offerings themselves, but on the essence released by the fire, the invisible life force that rose skyward in curls of light. Each spark, each ember, was a soul ascending. The people watching from afar felt both awe and dread, for the fire did not only consume objects, it purified the air of sin, the world of imbalance. If the gods were displeased, the flames would sputter, die, or turn black. But when the fire burned bright and steady, it was a sign. The gods were satisfied, and life would continue. And then came the ice. The most sacred of all rituals were conducted not in warmth, but in the biting cold of the Andes, atop glaciers, where the breath froze in the lungs and time itself seemed suspended. The Inca saw these places as the navels of the world, where earth and sky touched. The priests would climb with offerings wrapped in cloth, sometimes animals, sometimes food, and on rare, forbidden nights, a living soul. These were not sacrifices made from cruelty, but from reverence. To bury life within the ice was to preserve it forever, to give it back to the gods as it was received, pure, untouched, eternal. Those who were chosen for the ice rituals were said to become guardians of the mountains. Their bodies, encased in frost, would never decay. Their spirits were believed to remain awake, watching over the valleys and rivers below. To this day, archaeologists have found these frozen guardians, still seated, still clothed, their skin unbroken. To the scientific mind, they are victims of ancient superstition. To the Inca, they were protectors of balance, their stillness a form of eternal prayer. Fire and ice, two extremes, yet in the Inca heart, they were not opposites but reflections. Fire purified through destruction, ice through preservation. One burned away the mortal shell, the other froze it in time. The priests taught that a soul purified by both would become divine. And so, some rituals combined the two, bodies offered first to the fire's warmth, then carried high into the frozen peaks, their ashes or remains placed within icy altars. The symbolism was profound, life consumed, spirit sealed. It was believed that only through such dual transformation could true balance be restored between earth and heaven. The psychological power of these rituals was immense. To witness them was to confront the full scale of existence, to see how easily flesh surrendered to flame, how swiftly warmth became cold, how beauty turned to ash and then to silence. The people of the empire did not look away. They understood, perhaps more deeply than we do, that death was not a void but a doorway. Fire and ice were the keys that opened it. In the flickering of the flames and the shimmer of frost, they saw the face of creation, terrible, beautiful, eternal. Yet not all were comforted by these visions. Some chroniclers, even among the Inca themselves, wrote of priests who strayed too far, who sought to command rather than commune with the elements. In hidden valleys, forbidden sects performed rituals of excessive fervor, burning entire herds, offering human life not to the sun, but to lesser spirits of hunger and chaos. These acts were considered dangerous, even heretical. The empire tried to suppress them, but whispers remained, of fires that never went out, of frozen figures that glowed beneath the ice, of priests who vanished into the mountains, never to return. Such stories reveal a truth that transcends time, that faith, when touched by fear, can twist into obsession. The Inca believed themselves mediators between man and cosmos, yet in their pursuit of divine harmony, they sometimes created suffering beyond understanding. Their rituals of fire and ice became symbols not only of purification, but of the fragile boundary between reverence and destruction. To give one's life for balance was seen as sacred. To take life for control was not. The line between the two was perilously thin, drawn only by the intentions of those who held the flame or climbed the peak. Still, the Inca never abandoned these rites. They believed that each act of offering, each moment of contact with the sacred elements, renewed the world's fragile equilibrium. The mountains remained alive, the rivers flowed, the sun rose, and the empire endured. Every fire lit upon an altar, every offering buried in ice, was part of a cosmic conversation, an exchange between human fragility and divine permanence. The rituals reminded them that life could not exist without death, warmth without cold, creation without destruction. Even now, high in the Andes, villagers still light small fires at night and whisper prayers to the mountains. They no longer speak the ancient words, yet the gesture remains, a faint echo of those who once believed that through flame and frost, the gods could be appeased. And perhaps, in that thin air, where the stars burn bright and the wind cuts like glass, something still listens. In the dance of fire and ice, the Inca found meaning where others saw terror. They transformed the most brutal realities of nature into expressions of faith, turning pain into poetry, death into dialogue with the divine. It was a faith that understood the inevitability of suffering, and dared to find beauty within it. They believed their gods bled as they did. To the Inca, divinity was not detached, untouchable, or serene. The gods were not distant observers of human struggle, they were participants in it. The sun suffered when clouds covered it, the mountains ached when their peaks split with thunder, and the earth wept when rain refused to fall. In this world of living spirits, pain was not a punishment, it was a language. The Inca saw agony as proof of connection, a sacred echo of the divine endurance that bound all things together. And above all others, one god embodied this truth, Viracocha, the creator who wept for his children, who molded man from clay and breathed into him not just life, but the burden of suffering. The priests taught that when the world was young, even the gods had to endure trials to bring order out of chaos. They fought, bled, and sacrificed parts of themselves to forge balance in the cosmos. The myths tell of Inti, the sun, who burned with such love for humanity that he scorched the sky and dimmed his own light. Mama Quilla, the moon, wept silver tears for her lost children, those who died too young or vanished into the mountains. Each god bore a wound, a reminder that power required pain. The priests repeated these stories endlessly to the people, not to frighten them, but to comfort them. If even gods could suffer, then so could man, and in that suffering, one could find transcendence. This was the essence of the Incas' spiritual philosophy, that endurance was divinity. They believed that to bear pain willingly, to accept loss without despair, was to mirror the gods themselves. The greatest offerings were not those given in wealth or blood, but those given in silence, the stillness of a heart that accepted its fate without resistance. The Inca had no word for sin in the Christian sense. Instead, they spoke of waka, imbalance, a disruption in the harmony between man, nature, and the divine. When a person suffered, it was often interpreted not as punishment, but as purification, the rebalancing of forces unseen. The priests, as intermediaries between the mortal and the divine, understood this principle more intimately than any other. They believed that only by knowing pain could they speak to the gods with honesty. Thus, some performed acts of ritual endurance, piercing their skin with thorns, fasting in the freezing heights, or walking barefoot across obsidian stones until their feet bled. To them, pain was a prayer that required no words. The body was the altar, and its agony the offering. The more intense the suffering, the clearer the divine voice became. It was through this belief that the rituals of divine imitation were born, ceremonies in which priests reenacted the trials of the gods themselves. During the festival of Inti, dedicated to the sun, the high priest stood for hours under the blazing sky, cloaked in gold, refusing food or water. Their skin blistered, their throats cracked, but they did not move. It was said that Inti himself watched through the light, judging their strength. Only those who endured in silence could channel his blessing. During the lunar ceremonies of Mama Quilla, female priestesses cut strands of their hair and buried them beneath moonlit altars, symbolic offerings of beauty to the goddess who gave them life and sorrow in equal measure. Among the most haunting of these divine imitations was the rite of the weeping god, dedicated to Viracocha. The ceremony took place once every generation, when droughts and earthquakes struck the empire. In a vast courtyard surrounded by the empire's elite, the chosen priest would sit before an idol of the god, his face painted white with ashes. He would weep openly, his tears falling into a bowl carved from a human skull. The people watched in silence, for it was believed that the priest's sorrow mirrored the Creator's grief, that through his tears, Viracocha might remember his compassion for humanity and renew the world. But there were darker versions of this rite, performed far from the public eye. Spanish chroniclers later spoke of secret gatherings in which the priests invoked the suffering of the gods through more visceral means. Bloodletting, isolation, and hallucination, all designed to pierce the veil between worlds. One such account describes a priest who locked himself within a cave for 3 nights, surviving only on coca and snowmelt, seeking visions of Apu, the mountain spirit. When he emerged, his eyes were pale, his body trembling. He claimed to have spoken to the mountain, who demanded the offering of a life to restore its balance. Within days, a Capacocha child was chosen. The connection between divine suffering and human sacrifice was undeniable. The Inca did not see these rituals as acts of cruelty, but as reflections of cosmic empathy. If the gods themselves had endured pain to create the world, then humanity's suffering was simply the continuation of that divine cycle. Every drop of blood spilled upon the earth was believed to echo the first wound of creation, a necessary renewal that kept the universe alive. The priests were not executioners, they were imitators of divinity, guardians of the cosmic rhythm. What made this worldview so powerful was its psychological depth. The Inca did not separate faith from fear or love from loss. They understood that to live was to suffer, and that through suffering, one could glimpse eternity. This idea brought both comfort and horror. Comfort, because pain had meaning; horror, because meaning demanded pain. Their gods were not merciful saviors, but mirrors of human endurance, reflecting both nobility and cruelty in equal measure. The influence of this belief system extended beyond ritual. It shaped the very fabric of Inca society. Warriors were taught that courage was not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it, an offering of self to Inti. Mothers who lost children were told that their grief fed Mama Quilla, ensuring the moon would continue to shine. Even illness was interpreted through this lens. The body's suffering was a message from the gods, a sign to realign one's spirit. There was no wasted pain. Every tear, every wound, was part of a sacred dialogue between man and the divine. But with such devotion came danger. When a society worships endurance above all else, compassion begins to fade. Over time, the priest's pursuit of divine suffering turned into spectacle. The empire began to glorify hardship as virtue and mercy as weakness. Children trained for labor were praised for never crying. Soldiers who survived wounds without screaming were honored as chosen by the gods. The empire's power grew on this foundation, a civilization built upon the worship of endurance. And yet, beneath its glory, something darker stirred, a quiet belief that the gods demanded not just imitation, but escalation. That if pain was sacred, then greater pain must be even more divine. This is where faith begins to blur into obsession. The priests who once sought communion through pain began to seek control through it. They believed they could manipulate the gods' favor by orchestrating grander displays of sacrifice, greater acts of suffering. The lines between devotion and domination dissolved. What had begun as reverence for divine endurance became a theater of human agony. Still, amidst this descent into ritual extremity, there remained an undeniable beauty, a poetic fatalism that set the Inca apart from other civilizations. They saw life not as a right but as a loan, borrowed from the gods, to be returned in gratitude and pain. In their stories, even the gods longed for what humans possessed, the ability to feel, to weep, to endure. It was this belief, that pain connected heaven and earth, that made the Inca world both magnificent and tragic. When the Spanish came, they were horrified by what they saw. They called the Inca rituals barbaric, the priests demonic. Yet what they failed to understand was that beneath the blood and the tears, there existed a profound philosophy, one that recognized the sacredness of suffering, the necessity of struggle, the beauty of endurance. The Inca did not kill for pleasure or power, they offered life to keep life going. To them, death was not destruction, but transformation, the ultimate act of divine imitation. And perhaps, in a haunting way, they were right. The gods they worshipped were not monsters, but mirrors. Their pain was our pain, their endurance our lesson. In the frozen peaks and burning altars of the Andes, the Inca found something we have long forgotten: the ability to see the divine not in perfection, but in the cracks, the wounds, the tears that bind us all to the same eternal rhythm of creation and decay. When cruelty became worship, the Inca world reached its most haunting paradox. Within the blackened temples, pain was no longer punishment, it was devotion. The priests believed that only by breaking the human body could the divine be fed. Every scream, every drop of blood, was a language the gods understood. The night transformed into a living altar where terror met transcendence. But cruelty in the Inca sense was not chaos, it was balance. They saw no difference between creating beauty and inflicting pain, because both shaped the soul. A priest might whisper prayers over a trembling sacrifice not with hatred, but with reverence. To suffer was to serve. To endure was to ascend. It was not malice that drove them, but faith, the terrible kind that demands something from flesh to prove it is real. For those who watched, the horror was divine theater, the moment where mortal and God collided. To outsiders, these acts appear monstrous. Yet to the Inca, they were the highest form of order, cruelty transformed into cosmic harmony. When the dawn came, the blood-stained altars glowed in the first sunlight, and the priests saw not death, but renewal. In their silence, they believed mercy was weakness, and pain, the purest form of truth. The empire is long gone, its gold melted, its temples shattered, its gods silenced beneath foreign hymns. Yet in the mountains, where the air is thin and ancient, something of the Inca still lingers. Not in stone or empire, but in the questions they left behind. Questions about faith, balance, and the unbearable beauty of sacrifice. The Spaniards believed they had erased a pagan world, but what they buried was far older than their conquest: humanity's instinct to find holiness in suffering. When archaeologists uncover the frozen children of Capacocha, perfectly preserved in the Andean ice, the world trembles. Their faces are serene, untouched by decay, their eyes closed as if still dreaming. Scientists measure oxygen levels and isotopes to explain how they died, but no microscope can capture the silence around them, that haunting peace between pain and eternity. Were they victims? Saints? Or something in between? The Inca would say they were chosen, bridges between the mortal and the divine. It is easy to recoil at such devotion. We call it barbaric because we cannot imagine faith so absolute. But the more we look at them, the more we see ourselves. We too build altars to invisible gods: ambition, success, love, perfection. We sacrifice sleep, time, and sometimes even one another, not with knives, but with quiet desperation. Like the Inca, we bleed to make meaning. Their ceremonies may be gone, but the psychology that birthed them still beats within us. Perhaps that is why their ruins feel alive. Stand in Machu Picchu at dawn, and the silence hums like a heartbeat. The stones are warm beneath your hands as though they remember. Mist drifts through the terraces, curling over the walls like smoke from forgotten offerings. It is said that when the first sunlight hits the temple stones, the mountain itself exhales, as if the gods still breathe beneath it. In that moment, the line between past and present dissolves. You are not a visitor, you are a witness. The Inca believed that nothing truly ends, that death is only a change of state, a return to balance. Every offering, every sacrifice, was a dialogue with the universe. When they gave life, they did not destroy it, they completed it. The world fed on life as life fed on the world. This belief, as dark as it was, carried a profound kind of peace. Theirs was not the cruelty of chaos, but of cosmic duty, a submission to forces too vast to question. To modern eyes, this is almost impossible to comprehend. We live in a world that hides its pain, that seeks comfort and calls it progress. The Inca faced pain directly and turned it into art, ritual, transcendence. They sought beauty in fear, wisdom in mortality. In that way, their cruelty was a mirror, showing us that pain, no matter how refined our civilizations become, never leaves us. It only changes its form. Even now, deep in the Andes, old rituals survive in shadows. Farmers still pour chicha into the earth before planting, whispering to the mountains for blessing. Mothers still burn coca leaves under a full moon. They do not call it sacrifice, but the rhythm is the same, the acknowledgement that life demands an exchange. The gods may have changed, but the covenant remains. In the end, this is what the Inca understood, that to exist is to owe, and every breath must be repaid. Their empire fell because men with crosses could not understand that truth, and perhaps because they could not forgive the Inca for understanding it too well. The Spaniards built churches where temples once stood, but beneath those churches, the old stones still hum with the memory of their prayers. The legacy of pain is not a monument to brutality, it is a reflection of the human soul, fragile, fearful, magnificent. We all seek to make sense of suffering, to believe that every loss feeds some greater design. The Inca carved that truth into the bones of the earth itself. Their ceremonies were terrible, yes, but they were also honest. They did not deny the darkness that lives in creation. They embraced it, and in doing so, became eternal. And so the wind still moves through the ruins. The mountains still glow at sunset. The frozen children still dream. The empire is gone, but the question remains, whispered through stone and time alike. Does the divine demand our suffering, or is it only we who demand it, to feel that our lives were ever worth the offering?